Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Have you ever just taken a step back and marveled at how living things navigate the world around them? It is absolutely fascinating. I mean, whether you're a human dodging a puddle, a cat sprinting after a mouse, or even a simple plant bending toward the sunlight, every single organism has to read its environment and react just to survive. Today, we're exploring the incredible biological mechanisms of control and coordination that actually make all of this possible.
Picture this scenario for a second. You're in the kitchen, and your hand accidentally brushes against a red-hot stove. Instantly, literally in a fraction of a second, your arm jerks back. But here's the crazy part. You actually pull your hand away before your brain even fully registers the pain. How on earth does your body know to do that? How is that high adrenaline, incredibly precise movement coordinated so flawlessly to protect you?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Why living things move. 2. Nerves and reflex actions. 3. Inside the human brain. 4. How plants respond. And 5. The power of hormones.
Starting with Section 1, Why Living Things Move, the Need to React.
You know, when we see something moving, we usually just assume it's alive. Sometimes, that movement is really just a result of growth, like a tiny seed germinating and pushing the soil aside. But a lot of movement has absolutely nothing to do with growth at all. Think about a cat running, a buffalo chewing grass to digest it better, or a kid swinging on a playground. So why do we make these movements? Ultimately, movement is a carefully controlled response to a change in the environment. We do it to protect ourselves, like avoiding that hot stove, or to use the environment to our advantage. And in multicellular organisms, we have incredibly specialized tissues dedicated entirely to controlling and coordinating these exact movements.
Which brings us to Section 2, Nerves and Reflex Actions, the Emergency Bypass.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specialized structure of the nerve cell, or neuron. When you touch a hot object, you are facing an urgent, genuinely dangerous situation. You have to detect it immediately. Notice those branch structures on the left side of the neuron? Those are the dendritic tips. We have receptors located in our sense organs that are constantly acquiring information from the environment. Gustatory receptors detect taste, olfactory receptors handle smell, and receptors in your skin detect things like that intense heat. The moment that heat is detected at the dendritic tip, it sets off an absolute chain reaction.
Let's walk through this rapid relay race. First, the receptors detect the stimulus. This sparks a chemical reaction that creates an electrical impulse. That impulse then shoots down the long body of the neuron, which is called the axon, all the way to its end. But nerve cells aren't physically tied together in one continuous knot. There's actually a tiny gap between them called a synapse. To cross this gap, the electrical impulse releases chemicals that bridge the divide, instantly sparking a brand new electrical impulse in the next neuron. This signal travels all the way down to your muscle cells. And how do the muscle cells respond? Well, they actually have special proteins that change their shape and arrangement when they're hit by this electrical impulse, causing the muscle to contract. And boom, your arm moves.
But here is the real genius of the body's design. Thinking is a highly complex activity. If you had to consciously process the sensation of heat, send that signal up to your brain, think about the pain, and then decide to move your hand, you would be severely burned. So the body uses something called a reflex arc. Nerves from all over your body meet in a bundle in your spinal cord on their way up to the brain. Instead of waiting for the brain to process everything, the spinal cord creates a direct shortcut. It connects the input sensory nerve straight to the output motor nerve. This emergency bypass is exactly what violently pulls your hand back from the stove before your conscious brain even knows what happened.
Moving on to Section 3, Inside the Human Brain, the Ultimate Control Center.
So as thinking beings, we obviously rely on a lot more than just reflexes. And this brilliantly illustrates how the human brain essentially divides and conquers the massive job of running your body. It uses major regions to get this done. First up, the forebrain. This is the main thinking part. It handles voluntary actions, integrates sensory inputs like sight and hearing, and even has a specialized area that tells you when you're feeling hungry. Then we have the hindbrain, which controls the stuff we don't actively think about. A part called the medulla handles involuntary actions. Think blood pressure, your mouth watering at the sight of food, or vomiting. You definitely don't consciously control those. Finally, we have the cerebellum, which is also in the hindbrain. This handles the precision of our voluntary actions. Walking in a straight line, riding a bicycle, or picking up a pencil, that smooth, balanced coordination is all thanks to your cerebellum. Now, because the brain is such a delicate and frankly vital organ, it needs top-tier protection.
The body is brilliantly designed so that the brain sits safely inside a tough, bony box, the skull. But it doesn't just rattle around in there. Inside this box, the brain is contained within a fluid-filled balloon. This acts as a highly effective shock absorber against bumps and impacts, much like how your sensitive spinal cord is shielded by the hard, bumpy vertebral column down your back.
Let's slow things down a bit for Section 4. How plants respond, movement without muscles.
We've talked a lot about fast-acting nerves and muscles, but what about organisms that don't have those? Take the chewy mui plant, also known as the touch-me-not. Check out this visual proof. On the left, its leaves are open. On the right, immediately after being touched, they fold up and droop. The plant detected the touch, and the movement happened at a completely different point from where it was actually touched. This means information was communicated cell to cell, using electrical-chemical means. But without muscle proteins to contract, how did the leaves actually move? Well, plant cells pull this off by dynamically changing the amount of water inside them. By rapidly shrinking or swelling, they literally change their shape, causing the leaves to fold. No muscles required.
So when you look at plants, we actually see two completely different types of movement. First, there's the immediate response, like our touch-me-not plant. This is entirely independent of growth, relies on those fast water-based cell shape changes, and it happens quickly. Contrast this with directional responses, like a pea plant climbing a fence. A pea plant has tendrils that are sensitive to touch. When a tendril touches a support, the part touching the fence actually grows slower than the part facing away. This uneven growth forces the tendril to circle and cling to the object. So this movement is totally dependent on slow, deliberate growth.
And this brings us to a really vital concept called tropism. Tropism is simply the directional growth movement of a plant in response to environmental triggers. For instance, if a plant's shoots bend and grow toward the light, that's phototropism. Or have you ever noticed how a plant's roots always grow downward into the earth while the shoots grow upward? That's geotropism. It's responding to gravity. There's even chemotropism, where pollen tubes grow toward ovules in response to chemical signals. So plants might be slow, but they are constantly reading their environment and moving to survive.
And finally, Section 5. The power of hormones, the grand unifier.
Now, electrical impulses in animals are fast for sure, but they do have limitations. They only reach cells connected by nerve tissue, and those cells actually need time to reset between impulses. So to achieve steady, persistent communication across the entire body, multicellular organisms use chemical compounds called hormones. Look at how heavily plants rely on them. Auxin, for example, is synthesized at the shoot tip. If light comes from one side, auxin diffuses to the shady side, stimulating those cells to grow longer, which bends the plant toward the light. We also have gibberellins, which help with stem growth. Cytokinins drive rapid cell division in fruits and seeds. But plants also need to know when to stop growing, right? That's where abscisic acid steps in to inhibit growth, which is exactly what causes leaves to naturally wilt and fall. These chemical messengers diffuse away from where they're made to beautifully coordinate growth across the whole plant.
Animals use these wide-ranging chemical signals too. Imagine a squirrel suddenly facing a predator, a really scary situation. It has to make a choice, fight or run away. Both of those actions require massive amounts of energy and perfectly integrated tissues across the entire body. An electrical signal alone is just too limited for this kind of wide-ranging preparation. Instead, the animal body uses hormones to broadcast a persistent systemic signal to millions of cells simultaneously. It's gearing up multiple tissue types for a complex life-saving action all at once.
And the star player in this high-stakes moment? Adrenaline. Secreted directly into the blood from the adrenal glands, adrenaline acts like a massive systemic alarm bell. The moment it hits, your heart starts beating wildly faster, pumping huge amounts of oxygen straight to your skeletal muscles. At the exact same time, blood is immediately diverted away from non-essential systems like your digestion and your skin. Your breathing rate drastically spikes as your diaphragm and rib muscles rapidly contract. Your whole body is instantly primed, flooded with energy, and ready to fight for your life or sprint to safety. It really just makes you step back and appreciate the sheer brilliance of biology. I mean, isn't it completely fascinating that the very same biological strategy, using chemical hormones, is responsible for both the slow, deliberate bending of a plant toward the sun and the explosive heart-pounding rush of adrenaline pumping through our veins in a moment of danger? Whether you are a climbing tendril or a human jumping back from a fire, survival requires brilliant, beautiful coordination. Definitely something to think about the next time you see a plant stretching for the light or feel your own pulse race. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning and keep wondering.